Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Agenda Health podcast. I'm your host Piyush Sandoja, founder of Agenda Health, and today we are diving into the fascinating world of genomics with an incredible guest, Anuradha Acharya. Anuradha is the CEO of Map My Genome and the recently acquired Microbiome Insights. A trailblazer in her field, she graduated from IIT Kharagpur and the University of Illinois Chicago before returning to India to pioneer genomic testing in the country. In this episode, we'll explore what genes are, the critical role in personalizing healthcare, and how they form the foundation for preventive health and longevity. We'll also discuss the current limitations of our healthcare ecosystem in adopting genomics and how Anuradha has overcome these challenges to build a sustainable impact in India. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started with this. My first question is what is a gene? Like in layman terms, what exactly is a gene, and how does it contain so much information within itself?
So I think if you think about your body, you have a lot of different cells, right? In each, your body has a lot of different cells, and in each of these cells, you have some instructions which basically tell it, okay, what do you need to do, right? So in each of these cells, you have what we call as your DNA, and these are each of these is like 3.2 billion base pairs, right? Now, when we are talking about a gene, basically it will be a part of that set of instructions. So essentially, of these building blocks, like when you have a book, you are basically we write everything in A B C D E F G H, right? So similarly, I think when you are looking at how your instruction manual is made from DNA, then you have A, C, T, and G. And so a portion of that, which gives a very specific instruction, that is called as a gene, right? So it could be short, it could be long, but basically it will be made of A, C, T, and G. And that is what, and I mean, it could be, however long it needs to be. And that specific gene, which is there in each one of us, for example, the most popular one is, let's say, a BRCA gene, right? Everybody knows about it thanks to Angelina Jolie. But that would be a gene that is there. And similarly, there are almost 20,000 genes that we have. And each of them is what we would call as a gene. And the genome would be what would be like everything, the total information that is there with all the genes and everything else, that would be the genome. And for each of them, depending on where they are, they might have a slightly different instruction in terms of saying what do you need to do when you are in the eye versus hair versus hand and so on.
Okay, so basically, you're saying that every gene has a pre-coded algorithm into it, and like we used to in colleges when we used to study C, C++, and there used to be a functional library that has pre-written codes. So genes have pre-written code, and depending upon where they have a set of rules that they have to follow, depending upon which part of our body they are into.
So I think if maybe in a simpler term, it could be that you have a book, right? You have a recipe book, and in there you have a standard set of instructions that are there for recipes. But when you actually make it, that might be slightly different, right? But the actual instructions are going to be the same. Or if you think about like reading a book which has lots of chapters and paragraphs, so your gene is like one of those paragraphs in there. But when somebody else reads that book, they might see that they might have made a mistake or a change in terms of how they have written that. So I think those are what causes the changes. But your basic book of life is a set of instructions that you are assigned when you are born, and that will remain the same. Eventually, I think as the cell keeps replicating or copying and all of that, there comes to be a lot of changes that might be there within those instructions. But otherwise, your the book that you were born with continues to be there in every part of your cell, and therefore you'll see that what was given to you from your mom and your dad, that will remain.
Yes.
But what you do will decide how much of that ultimately transfers in terms of how your health is going to be, how your disease predisposition is likely to, I mean, how you are actually going to see in terms of your actual disease outcome. But what you are born with is what you're born with. That you can't change.
Okay. So again, like I'm trying to understand from a layman point. So it's like, let's say all the students have the same degree, And once they go out in the real world, depending upon their own learnings, their own experiences, they'll have a different sort of a life. And at the end of the day, there'll be a combination of that experience and the degrees that they had. And then that is the new sort of information that they'll pass on to the new generation.
Absolutely.
Am I right?
That's absolutely correct, right? Like, so that's this basic set of instructions was the same. Everybody got the same degree, but when they went out in the world, even though they all came with the same degree, they ended up doing very different things, depending on multiple things, right? Your which industry you went in, which whether you went in at the right time, whether you were able to talk to other people, and so on. So there are many other variables that are there, but the basic instruction or the basic set of things are still the same. So there's a lot of things that individuals can do to be able to say, we started with, a particular, let's say, a bank balance, like one of our board members says, you started with a basic bank balance when you were born, right? Now you can either increase that or you can reduce it based on what you did with it, right? So similarly, what you are born with is not something you can change, right? Your set of your instructions that your genes came with, those are the same. But ultimately, whether you were doing the right things in terms of your nutrition, your exercise, and all that, will create a different outcome, and you then might potentially also pass some of that to your next generation as well, right? So I think it's very important that it's not just when you are doing something in your life, it's not just for you, it is also for the future generations.
And in the degree, we know that. For example, I studied chemical engineering, so I have the knowledge of that particular area. But from genes' point of view, what we have got from our parents, we don't have that information. We know that we were passed on these genes into our body when we came to this earth. But do you feel that it's critical to know about this genetic information?
I think it's important to know because, like I said, like if you know, then you are likely to act upon it, right? Now, when you don't know, then you're probably not going to do anything about it, right? You might be aware of some things. You might be aware that something runs in your family, and therefore you need to be a little bit more aware of it. But if you today have the ability to be able to do that, then why don't you, right? Because you realize that it's not just about saying, will I get this in the future? It is about saying, do I know that this is likely, this is how my body is wired, and therefore I need to try a little bit harder, right? So if you think about it, let's say all of us use Google Maps or some maps, right? Now, it's not that, let's say you want to live your life and you want to go from point A to point B. Now, it's not that you can go through holes, you can go through a traffic jam, you can go through all of that, or you can take an alternate route, right? So basically, when you are aware that these are the potential challenges that you may face, then either one, you try a little bit harder to overcome those, or you're saying, I'll take an alternate route towards better life, right? So I think that knowledge is extremely important because when you don't know, then you don't know. And then everybody says that if you today going to a doctor, usually what happens, you're getting a test done. And if you're, let's say if you take, like say diabetes, if your HbA1c is below a particular threshold, then they'll say that you are fine, right? But that's not how health works. I think for everything, you are getting to that point, right? So it's not that you suddenly get diabetes or you suddenly get cancer or you suddenly get something. So when you have the knowledge, if you start taking care of it earlier, then you are very likely to prevent that for a longer period of time versus when you do it after you have gotten to that stage where you are totally diseased, right? And I think that's the problem. People need to understand that it's not a switch that turns on or off. It is, you are getting to that state. And therefore, when you are aware that you are more likely to get it versus somebody else, maybe you need to try harder, right? So for instance, when we are writing exams, if you don't know, like let's say geography, or you don't know something else, you try a little bit harder, right? And it's the same thing with health. If you know that this is how your body is wired, then maybe you need to try a little bit harder if you want to stay healthy, if you want to enjoy life more, right? Versus saying I will wait till a problem hits me, uh, and at that point of time, it's very hard to go back to your proper health. So I think that's what people need to understand, that health is never a on-off switch. It is in the process of getting there, and how your body is wired. If you know how your body is wired, then you know how to go around it, right? You know how to find a way to be able to figure out how you're going to tackle those potential risks or your predispositions over there.
Correct. You rightly said that in Indian healthcare, the narrative is sort of set from patient point of view. You you go to a doctor when you feel some pain or there is some fear in your mind, and like even though we talk about preventive health so much, but still the gold standard is a blood test. Do you feel that maybe there might come a day wherein the genetic testing becomes the gold standard?
I think you're already starting to see that a little bit, right? Because your blood test is telling you uh, your current snapshot, right? It is not telling you that this is how you're wired, right? It's possible that, let's say, you know, you studied for an exam, you aced that exam, right? For a few days, you didn't eat sweets, you didn't do a lot of things. And if you're in your 20s, maybe you'll be able to do that faster versus, let's say, when you're in your 50s because, or your 60s, right? So I think it's, if you remember your IIT days, you'll remember that one night before we studied for an exam, we aced the exam. But that doesn't mean you learnt how to do that on a, overall this thing, right? Similarly, I think if you think about, um, if you want to understand what is happening today, yes, you do a blood test, you understand, how your body performed today, right? But that is not how your body is wired, right? So if you want to understand your actual wiring of your body and how you actually perform, then I think it's important to understand the genetics, because that's one constant that doesn't change in your life. Everything else does, right? And therefore that knowledge is important. And so now we are seeing that a lot of hospitals have also started making this as part of the preventive health check, because you can do one of two things, right? One, you need to do this only once in your lifetime. You don't have to keep repeating it. So you create this as your baseline. Then you can keep adding to that your, what is going on currently in your body. So it will show how does your body actually process those nutrients, or how does your body actually do something today. And that's helpful, because I think one is, if you understand your baseline. Second, you need to know where you are currently going. Then your blood test will tell you, okay, this is where you are in your journey, right? It'll tell you this is, what has happened with your blood markers today. You are currently at 6.2 HbA1c. You are currently at your LDL is this much, your HDL is this much, and I think those are helpful markers to understand what is currently happening with your life, right? But it does not mean that just because you ace that one exam doesn't mean that you will not get it. You will not have a problem in the next exam when you don't do that late night studying and doing it when you're much older in life, because at that time you don't have that same capacity to be able to do that, right? So that's why it's important to understand that you find that when you're a 20-year-old, you don't care about a lot of things because it's very easy for you to get there. But ask that same thing, like learning a language, very easy when you're a young kid, versus when you're older, it takes a lot more effort to be able to get there. So it's important to understand how's your body wired, and also to understand what progress you have made. And that's why a combination of the two is much more valuable than saying, can I just get one versus the other? Because I think as human beings, we also need to know, okay, how much progress have you made, right? So you understood a baseline, that genetic baseline is created. But if you can beat that, you feel good about it, right? Like I have a risk for type 2 diabetes. I'm 53 years old. By now, based on what my dad had and mom had and all, and my genetics, I would have already had type 2 diabetes, right? But I don't, right? So that is a progress of where I am today. But if I didn't understand that I had a risk, maybe I wouldn't care about what I'm eating or, how I exercise and all that. And therefore, you take a little more effort to be able to know and feel good about doing what you do based on whatever your family history is saying, or based on what your genetics is saying. So it is not about scaring people to say that you will get it, but it's more about saying if you are aware that you will get it, are you doing something when you are younger versus when you are much older?
So, in layman terms, my understanding is your blood test is the exam, and the genetic test is the knowledge of your body. Why exactly is it happening? Where exactly has the problem started? To be very honest, I got this genome patri test done, and the results actually scared.
Maybe the first time when you saw it.
Yes. So, for example, there were few pointers that I've noted out, and I wanted to discuss the same. It told me at a population level what is the risk that I am under. For example, it said that my risk of insulin resistance or diabetes is 1.4x times the overall population size. Similarly, what was the most haunting? It was that my risk of lung cancer is 2.52 times the population at a population level. So, from a layman person, like this actually scared me because when I get my blood test done, my HbA1c is fine. Everything comes out fine. But when you see these kind of numbers, so I just want to understand how should I use this number, and from this point, where exactly should I move?
So I think you took two examples, and let me assure you first thing that my genetic risk for diabetes is higher than yours, right? And I'm older than you, so you should feel good about that, right? That if you're doing the right things, you will be able to go through this journey
Does
of
it
life.
does it mean that this number will stay constant throughout my life? Like this is because of the genes that I've got from my family. So from a family level, my risk is higher. This number will stay constant.
That is going to stay constant, but you have to remember one thing, right? That your overall outcome, which is what I was saying, that is not just dependent on your genes, right? So you have only 26% of the overall risk. Like if you remember probability and all of
Yes.
that, your
Yes.
26% of your risk is coming from genetics, right? So compared, let's say if you and somebody else were there, both of you are doing identical things, then you were at a higher risk compared to that other person, right?
Okay.
But but imagine more than 70% is, I mean, almost 70% is coming from other things that you do, right? What you're eating and all that. So you have to realize that there is so much in your control, right? That if I had, let's say, for simplicity, let's say 30% is coming from genes and 70% is coming from what you do. That means you are more in control than your genes, right? It is just that if you had, let's say, somebody, your brother, right, or your sister, both of you were doing identical things. You were eating the same, you were, running the same, you were exercising the same, but you had a higher genetic risk. Then your chances of getting it would be higher, right? Similarly, I don't know if you saw, let's say, you know, there's a ACTN3, the fast twitch muscle, right? Now, my daughters came back to me and they said that, I had the fast twitch muscle, they didn't. So they said, does it mean we can't run? No, it doesn't mean that, right? It basically means that if we both trained for, let's say, 10,000 hours for Olympics, and we both had the same nutrition and we both had the same exercise, then I would be at an edge compared to them, right? But if I'm doing nothing about it and you are doing all the right works, you will still beat me, right? So basically, that's what people have to understand, that a lot, and even in the case of lung cancer, I think what I want to let you and others know is that 50% of your risk is coming from smoking and other things, right? So you have to understand that if you are at a slightly higher risk, you need to maybe focus on that. You can't change the genetic risk that you are born with, but a large portion of your risk is coming from things you can control. And those are the things you need to be aware of, right? So it is not like the actual genetic risk is small. What you can control is large. So I think that's the point that I want people to understand, that the idea is not to scare you that you will get, lung cancer or anything, but it is to say that if you are at a higher risk of lung cancer, can you stop smoking, right? And I'm saying can because if you're already doing it, might take a little bit of an effort to do that. But let's say there is I'm not telling
I
you.
don't smoke.
By you, I don't mean.
No, I'm just saying that it was more scary because my lifestyle is more or less fine. So what you're saying is that lifestyle, how you live your life matters more. If you have this information, now that I have it, that I am at a higher risk compared to the population, 2.52x. So it means that I need to take care of myself even more. I can't have a sloppy lifestyle and later on complain that later on put it on my genes, that blame my parents that he gave me bad genes and that is why my life is
You can't blame your parents. I think there. Having said that, there are a few genetic diseases, right? Like the kind of things we just discussed, the diabetes and lung cancer and all of that, are more what we call as a polygenic, and complex diseases. So these have quite a lot of environmental effects on what you can do. But there are some diseases, right? Like let's say thalassemia or sickle cell or some of these where you you are not that much in control, right? So there is a varying degree of how much role your genetics has to play in some of these. Now those also can be preventable if people, let's say, were aware that let's say I have a risk. I'm giving an example, right? Like I'm a carrier of being thalassemia, for instance. Now if me or if let's say I plan to have a baby with someone who also has that, then you are possibly passing that risk on to your child, right? So I think that's what people need to understand, that one, there's a varying degree of how much role genetics has to play in each of these diseases. And what would be important to say is you just looked at the 1.2 and 2.2 and all, but you should also see the actual how many, like in the case of diabetes, it's 20 out of 100 people might be at risk for diabetes. But lung, so it depends on also the how many people actually get it. So sometimes it might just be 1 in 10,000 people or 1 in 100,000 people. So then the overall risk is itself low, right? So there is the population risk, which automatically might be low. And then you have the risk that you have compared to the population. It still means that other people, even if they got, let's say, 0.968 of diabetes, as an example, it's not that they can just go and eat everything and do everything. But it means that compared to you, they might have a slightly lower thing. So therefore, they might do a few wrong things and they'll still be okay. But it does not get rid of their possibility of becoming diabetic, right? So if you find that, like, for instance, I come from Rajasthan, right? And a lot of people in Rajasthan eat sweets like, it's part of your life, right? And and then I think then you, regardless of a lot of genetics or others, you might still get diabetes. So I think that awareness is important, because when you are aware, you are likely to make those changes. So.
Okay. I have two follow-up questions. One is, let's say these numbers give me a population level risk. It's a relative information that I have. But let's say if I have to move forward, and let's say if I want another preventive test to be done to understand on an absolute level what exactly is the problem. So can I do that? Let's say if someone gets this information, obviously they will be scared and they would want to know what exactly is happening. Now, what should I do? Like in my case, should I get another test, or is there another test that is available?
So there are three things. So one, I don't know if you did the genetic counseling or not, but that's an important part of this process.
I didn't.
Yes. So I think you missed out on the real value that you should be getting from doing some of these tests, right? So what does the genetic counseling session do? What they're doing is they'll say, okay, Piyush, give me your family history, or they'll ask in a little bit better way, but basically get your family history. They'll ask you what you eat and how you exercise and so on. They then correlate that with your genetic risk, and then tell you, okay, these are the things that would help you if you avoid. These are the things that if you, what you could potentially add to your diet or exercise or whatever. And these are the tests that would help you in monitoring your progress, right? So like you mentioned, since you mentioned diabetes and lung cancer and others, what you would do is you will then do certain blood tests that they're recommending. So now you need not do the package that contains 2000 blood tests, for example. But what you can do is you can do the ones that are relevant for you. And therefore, you are able to then track that your progress better. So one is doing this out of your blood test. The second thing is there are also ways to be able to understand what's currently going on in your body with other genomic tests. And by other genomic tests, I mean, let's say if you take things like your gut microbiome, right? Or you're looking at an epigenetic marker. Those are also things that will tell you about what is currently happening in your body. And at some point, I think once these technologies become more commonplace, you will find that these might actually become more popular than some of the other tests that we are currently seeing in the market, right? But as of now, I think the gut microbiome has gained a lot more popularity. The epigenetics, I think, is still, science is still developing quite a bit. So I think at some point of time, it will become as common as doing a regular blood test. And that is also done with a little prick of blood. The gut microbiome, for instance, is done with a little stool sample. But there are many other microbiomes in your body as well, right? Your mouth, your skin, and various other things. So you can do many of these kind of tests to be able to understand what is currently going on with your body. Can you understand the risk for diseases? Can you understand whether antibiotics will work for you? And a lot more interesting insights that you might get with doing some of these other tests. But the easiest thing to do would be to say, can I do blood tests that are recommended for me post my genetic counseling session? And be able to then monitor based on when they are saying would be more relevant. If, for instance, if you had more issues that can be tracked with gut microbiome test, then that might be a good idea to be able to then add that to the mix as well. But you can do a lot more blood tests, but also there are sensors that you can use to be able to track them. So, for instance, if you have a risk for type 2 diabetes, maybe you want to also understand how your sleep is. You want to understand what's going on with your glucose monitoring and so on. So there are CGMs. There are many other things that you can today do to be able to then say, can I understand what's happening with my body today?
So you're saying that if we are talking about preventive health, so it can't be standardized, it has to be personalized. And currently what happens in the industry is that everything is standardized, be it blood tests, like you said, that with this genetic information, I don't need to get that packaged, standardized tests, maybe 2000 biomarkers. I don't need to do that. So basically, rather than wasting my money over there, I can now actually get my personalized health that will actually help me prevent better from my point of view, rather than at a general point of view.
Although I would say that there are a few tests that maybe everybody needs to do just to, I think that might be helpful for everybody in general. So it's not that, you might want, and in most cases, those might be included. So it's not that, based on your age and all that, maybe things like your lipid profile and others might be a common thing for many, but it helps you in creating that. Do you need to do your lipid profile every 3 months if you had a high risk for higher LDL and higher triglycerides, versus doing something that would be maybe monitoring it for a more standard duration, right? So let's say if normally you are supposed to do it once in a year, do you need to do it once in a quarter, right? Versus once in a year. So I think that frequency is also important to understand, that based on your current predispositions, you can fine tune how much, what, and when you need to do these tests.
You just touched upon the gut microbiome test. I was also reading about it. I checked it on your website, and I could see that what you are talking about and what others are talking about are similar things, that our gut contains or controls the metabolism, immunity, and mood. The gut health takes care of that. What you are saying is that your gut microbiome test will help you understand your body, what kind of bacteria your body has, and based on that, you can personalize your health parameters. But what others are saying, for example, you must have seen there are so many startups that are selling gut health packaged powder, and wherein they are charging a lot of money, maybe 50 to 100 rupees per day, and it's like on a yearly basis, it's costing 25 to 30,000 to people. So these two solutions are completely different. What you're saying is that you need to personalize it, and these people are saying that you have to standardize it. They're trying to.
One thing doesn't work for everybody, and I have realized recently. I think I was visiting a gastroenterologist with my daughter, and I realized that the kind of diet they're recommending for one problem versus the other are completely different, right? Which basically means that understanding what's actually happening with your gut is extremely important, right? So one, I think you need to first get a clear diagnosis, and a lot of times the gut microbiome can help you in that particular distinction between one or the other. See, I think as a normal consumer, we can say I'm feeling odd about like my gut, right? Or something is wrong, or I'm hearing some sounds, or I'm having bloating, or I'm having diarrhea, or something like that. But if you realize, it'll be common in many of them, and sometimes you have to. I think you need a good gastroenterologist to sort of figure that out, right? Now, what gastroenterologists are now doing is they're saying, okay, if I get this information about the gut bacteria, I can actually help understand if there is one. Most importantly, is this caused by a problematic bacteria, right? And in large majority of the cases, it could be things like your H. pylori, for instance, right? Which is fairly common pathogenic, which means a bad bacteria in the Indian population, right? And it's also found in other populations. Or it's an E. coli or otherwise, right? So these are all problems that you can say, can I find like a bad player in my gut, right? So I think that's an important part of what you need to do to understand. So it's not that if I just have a probiotic, it will solve everything in my life. It won't. And I think I can say that with a lot of confidence that it won't if you just take any standard probiotic, right? So you need to first rule out, is there a problematic this thing in my gut? So there we would give this report. The doctor will be able to understand with all other symptoms if there is a serious problem with their. So they'll maybe do an endoscopy, colonoscopy, whatever they need to do. But this really helps them in sort of, if you say that triaging the problem, I think that's one part of the thing. The second part is that if you just give somebody like a standard probiotic, it doesn't always work for two reasons. One, based on your current microbiome, it might not sit well with you, right? That could be one, that it might not really work for you. The second is, in many cases, the actual strains are not even there that you need, right? So you might find that there will be, it'll say 50 billion CFUs and 20 billion and all that. For a normal person, and I think even when I didn't know much, I think you'd be like, oh, okay, lots of things are there, let's take it, right? And I think it doesn't necessarily work. Or the third problem could be that it might be advertised that it is there, but it doesn't work. Because there is no one who is certifying that is there. So one, I think even if everything is correct, it might still not work because the microbiome is very complex, right? So it might be that it might be dependent on many other factors. It could be, there could be things like your actual lifestyle measures. It could be like a pathogenic bacteria that we talked about. It could also be that maybe the doctors are giving you antibiotics and it's not working because you have resistance to it. So the microbiome will help you understand the antibiotic resistance as well, right? So I think it's like you don't take a microbiome test just to say, I'm going to take a standard solution, because that's not going to help you, right? It is first, you have to triage it. Is it a problematic thing? Once that is diagnosed, the doctors will be the best at to help you understand. The second is to say, if you need some specific strains which you have low or high, that are affecting your mood, they're affecting your energy, or you don't have the short chain fatty acids or anything, lifestyle measures are likely to make more difference, right? And then the third part is, do you really need something to supplement? And the reason it's called a supplement is it's something that you add on top of the other things that you're doing, right? And you have to make sure you buy it from the right place, right? Because you need to make sure that, look at your microbiome, see what you are deficient in, and then based on that, supplement it with that particular strain along with others that has been shown to be working. So I think there are many pieces to this puzzle. And the gut microbiome is one part of the problem. And sometimes you might not even find the problematic thing in just one part of your microbiome. You might have to look at other things. So I would say that it offers you a lot of insight into it. And I think that, along with what you can do with in terms of your lifestyle changes and working with your doctor and others, will help you solve the problem. It is not a off the shelf solution for everybody. I would not recommend that you take a probiotic. But yes, things like, should you take yogurt? Maybe it's a good idea to take, right? I mean, in most cases, a lot of your fermented foods and others are not a bad idea to be able to take. But I've found out, for instance, we all say fiber is great for everyone, but it may be not in some specific cases, right? So I think those are the ones where you need the guidance of somebody who understands your gut health. If you have a serious problem, if you don't have a serious problem and you're doing it as I want to just prevent, even there I would say, do something that is more personalized for you rather than doing it for just because some influencer is taking it or somebody is taking it does not solve your problem. Your body is your own, your microbiome is your own. So don't just go and do what, I don't know, whoever is the influencer is doing, right? Because your information that you're getting from a gut microbiome is to get a view of what is going on, but it has to be in consideration with all other parameters that are there in your gut. So take it a little bit more seriously, in maybe along with the genetic information and your blood biomarkers. Then it gives you a better understanding of what is happening with your gut health, rather than saying, I will take this and I'm done for all my problems with the gut. I think most people you will talk to after that will say that it didn't make much of a difference.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. So what you're saying is that one has to get the root cause analysis. Like in our professional lives, we talk about the root cause analysis for every problem. If some idea has failed, do a root cause analysis, and then we'll see what can we do. But when it comes to our body, we talk about preventive health, but we don't talk about root cause analysis. Do you feel that this is again the problem of our industry, wherein the pharmaceutical and wellness industries, even though the manufacturing is happening at the same plant, but both of these are projected as separate industries. So, for example, wellness completely keeps itself separate, wherein there is no doctor involvement. But when you were talking about gut health, you said that you get the root cause analysis done and then go to a doctor. So you're making doctor part of the preventive health cycle or the holistic health maintenance cycle.
uh, for any kind of a problem, because they can help you, but most cases we all go to doctors after it's too late. And then what is the solution, right? They have to give you some drug, or they have to give you some like something to hit that problem at that point of time, right? When it comes to diabetes also, people go there after their blood sugar levels have gone to a level where you need to control it, right? So you can, at least most of the doctors that I've spoken to, everybody understands that these are the challenges, but we don't go to the doctor first. We go when there's a problem, and then we get angry when they can't solve it because you have not done the right things. So I think we need to make them part of the whole solution. And I'll use the words of one of the nutritionists that told me this long time, many years ago, and said that everything that we eat a pill goes through a lot of regulatory challenges. But what you're putting, which is 90% or 99% of what we do, which we ingest, nothing we think about, right? Like what food you're eating and all that. And those are also things that you are eating that can influence, and mostly that is what influences your health more. So I think if we can make doctors as part of our health from the beginning, I think we'll see a lot better value in terms of the outcomes that we'll get in society. We blame them because we go there too late, and therefore they can't do much, because reversing something is an interesting word, but it doesn't work always, right? But I think if you want to prevent something, like I go see, I go and meet doctors. I always have a discussion with them to understand what else do I need to do. So I think that would be my advice, that talk to your doctor when you don't have a problem, they might be able to guide you better in terms of what you can do.
You talked about the genetic markers matter 30% of the time, and 70% it's your lifestyle. Like I had a similar discussion with Dr. Sonam Kothari, who is the founder of Butterfly Learnings. They run basically clinics for autism treatment. And I was talking about how does autism happen? Is it a genetic problem, or that the lifestyle of the parents led to the delayed development of the child? So then she also started talking about genetics versus epigenetics, wherein she said that even though it's not 100% sure because there are no clinical trials or clinical studies, but still, as per her experience and knowledge, she said that still you can get a whole exome sequence done. That will give you exactly where the micro deletions are happening. It's little technical language, probably you will be able to put more light into it. And once you have a little bit of idea exactly what is happening, and let's say if there is some study that was done, if not in India, somewhere else, and if someone else found out that some kind of micro deletion or some kind of genetic mutation can result in autism, then probably you can build your personalized therapy sessions accordingly. Do you agree to this?
I think autism is a big subject, right? There are many types of and that's why there's a spectrum of what can cause it and
Yes.
not. There's definitely some role of genetics. So typically, I think we have seen that many times they look at the whole genome sequencing as well to understand some of the possible micro deletions, duplication, whatever, any possible intellectual disability. There are things that might come up with that as well. So one is that. The second is we are seeing now that the role of a lot of the epigenetic factors, which today you can start studying them as well, right? So you can look at certain parts of where these problems might occur, and therefore you'll be able to look at that as well. The third thing that I found out from a few doctors is that they are saying that sometimes it is just the diet of the child that might change, like how that might develop. So depending on where they are in terms of that, using genetics to see if there is a genetic problem, I think becomes an easier thing to understand, right? Because that can be done easily. The second part is then to understand, is this a problem of epigenetics? Is this happening because of environmental causes? Is it happening because of food we are eating and all that? So I think those are all pieces that currently I think different doctors have different approaches to that. And I'm not somebody who is, have the right, necessary right skills to be able to say that, this is what is there. But typically what we have seen is that doctors are either looking at doing a whole genome or a whole exome sequencing, sometimes to rule out a different disease altogether, right? So it might not just be in terms of just looking at, is there a specific cause of it, and then they treat the child. So I have, for instance, we have one homeopathic doctor who does a lot of exome sequencing, right? We have most cases, I think, many of the other doctors do whole genome sequencing or an exome sequencing. So we've seen a lot of different types of ways that doctors have been looking at it, but it is a complex problem, right? It is not a simple solution that you can just do one thing versus the other. If you do the whole genome, then you are getting more information, and therefore you can understand it a little bit more. And similarly, like exome is a subset of that, since your difference will be looking at 90 GB of data versus, let's say, 6 GB of data, and trying to understand that. So I think we are seeing different types of approaches by the doctors, and it is not a simple solution, simple problem to solve, but it is becoming a lot more commonplace than it used to be in the past, right? So earlier they would mostly say that, are we looking at it from a chromosomal point of view, which was an easier problem to look at. But now there are many more pieces to that problem. And therefore, I think a single approach might not necessarily be the most effective or the most common approach for them. And I'll leave it to the doctors to tackle it in the way they feel appropriate. The other thing that we have also started seeing in the case of autism is to look at the microbiome. And we are seeing that there are several people who are looking at studies to be done to see how that can be done. And one of the companies that we've just acquired, Microbiome Insights, they have done a lot of studies in this space as well. So I think
Okay.
this is a different view of how do you tackle this problem by looking
Okay.
at the gut microbiome as well. So I think many people are understanding it from different angles, and I think maybe in the next few years we'll see a more streamlined pipeline of how do you actually solve for this. So you'll have an epigenetic viewpoint, we have a microbiome, we have a genetic, and at some point of time, maybe as we combine all these data types, then maybe a better view of saying, can I put all these pieces together to understand this better? But I think that's a few years away in terms of saying, can we fully understand this problem? I don't think we have that yet.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I wanted to talk about microbiome insights. You've talked about this use case of autism. Are there other use cases pertaining or to India?
There are a lot of use cases,
Okay. Okay.
and I think maybe one common use case that you might have heard about uh, is, other than the human health factor that we do look at the gut health and all of that. We also saw that during COVID they did sequencing of the drainage pipes and all that to understand if what kind of things are there and so on, viruses and bacteria and fungi and all that, right? So one is to say, can we look at environmental also, your soil, how do your plants grow? Is there, what kind of bacteria are there? What kind of problems are there? So you can think about air, water, soil, all those are things that are in the microbiome, can be not just for human beings, but there are also microbiomes that are there in the soil, in the water, and so on. And that determines some of the challenges that we may face in terms of human health. So that is number one. The second thing is, even in the case of the human health, there is the gut, which we all study quite well, but there is also like your oral microbiome, right? So sometimes your cardiovascular and other diseases you might be able to detect with just saliva instead of looking at stool and others. Then there is the vaginal microbiome that can be very helpful to understand for newborns, and also for women who are going through many different challenges, hormonal changes and so on. And then you have the skin microbiome can be helpful to understand how do you treat for acne and things like that, right? So it's a fascinating field, because today you not only have, one is to study, that's, you will look at understanding many different things. Microbiome Insights actually incidentally did many interesting studies, including like the blue whale and some Arctic animals and this and that, right? So studying of very endangered species, understanding all of that. Uh, Many of these studies can be in relation to how do these affect, let's say, your problems of diseases of the mind, or other specific health challenges. Gut is the most common, but many other things. Neuro diseases are very common to be able to study, Parkinson's and others. So I think diabetes is another. So there are many parts that we have done. I think there was one more on the fatty liver disease, which is another huge problem in India.
Okay.
So I think there are many areas of human health you can study, but there is also, we are seeing an increasing number of clinical trials being done to actually use this as a therapeutic, right? We talked about probiotics, that
Yes.
probiotics will solve all your problems. It doesn't, but there are many companies today that are actually coming up with a real therapeutic version based on the microbiome. And I think that will be the future, right? You might see that, in the future, you might not have so much of um, the regular maybe medicines, but you might have some medicines replaced with these kind of. And I was looking through like some of these clinical trial websites and all. A large portion of those are today being done on the microbiome, right? So,
Okay.
so that's the area that this is heading towards. That you will start seeing that many more companies will look at the, you know, possibility of using this as a real medicine. Right? That could be another thing. The third could be that I think many people today are uh, like taking some of these weight loss medicines, that like Monjaro and Wegovy and Ozempic and all, that might cause lots of other issues. So then you can look at the microbiome to understand, what is currently happening with your gut and all that. So there are many problem areas to be addressed with the microbiome, but these would be some of them that are there. That can you do studies that will help you to make better drugs? Can you do studies to understand which crops are going to be good? So, for instance, I think if you look at saffron, which is you find that only in Kashmir, like you have very good quality versus somewhere else. So you might have the same crop, but the outcome is very different based on how your soil is, how your environment is, and so on. So I think when we start looking at metagenomics, as it is called, that will help in making many things about our health better, and I think including the environment. And that's why I'm fascinated by what you can do with the microbiome. That it's not just about saying, can I understand my gut health and take a probiotic, but it's also about saying, can I understand how this influences disease? Can I understand how a therapeutic can be made? Can I understand how my food that I'm eating, when I say organic, is it there? And a lot of times we have done, let's say a probiotic company is coming up, we have done the testing to understand if that has worked with them.
So, in layman terms, can I say that you're trying to build that root cause analysis on a system or society or country level? So, do you feel that you'll get to understand each and every industry, maybe directly involved in health or maybe assistive health, sort of? So, probably you'll in future you must be aiming to work with the government and the pharmaceutical industries, as you said.
So it's pharmaceutical industry, it is agriculture, it is environment, skincare.
I was reading about the Korean skincare industry because they are the biggest. And they also talk about similar issues, like making a skincare regime or skincare product based on a particular problem, and then doing all of the analysis you just talked about. So, probably that will be very huge in the sense it might have global repercussions also in a positive way. So, we are in the last section of our discussions and questions. Everyone talks about preventive health, but when we see the numbers, it's completely opposite. Like recently, there have been a huge funding in cancer, in treating cancer. But that's not on the preventive side, it's predictive side in the sense that it has happened and now you are investing in building capacities to treat cancer, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and surgical oncology. Why is there no investment in cancer prevention? Like probably your company comes in the same direction. I have seen that in the US there is huge funding, billions of dollars of funding in genetic testing, but not in India. Why?
It's a good question. I wish I knew the answer. But I think it's primarily because that's an easier problem to look at, right? Like you know that these many people come for treatment and therefore you know that this is needed. So I think it is more that you know that when one person has a disease, that they will stay in a hospital for X number of days, they will consume this much medicine, and therefore you build a business case around that, right? Which is a bad way of looking at it. I mean, if I was looking at what potential this thing can be done. But I think we are seeing now a little bit of interest in prevention, but not as much as I would like it to be. And I think it is because we have to start showing the real value that it has created, right? One is how many less people have gone to the hospital, or if they've gone, have they gone there at stage 0 or before stage 0, right, of any problem. And I think if we can start creating a system that is looking at it from a different view of how do you compensate the medical fraternity, how do you compensate insurance, how do you like from an insurance point of view, from the government point of view, grants point of view. If we start thinking of it from that point of view, you will see a change, right? Because I think that happened even in the US, I think, to say, how do you reduce this thing, rather than saying, I think today the challenge will be, in some cases, the doctors might be asked to do more versus less. Right? So I think if we have the whole compensation or the way the whole industry is created, then you will see that change happening, right? Because otherwise, it is not the fault of one individual. I think it's the fault of a system that we are designed to look at creating profit out of a patient versus saying, can I help in? And it's not the doctors don't want to do. I think it is a matter of how do you get investment, how do you make money, and how do you continue to sustain, right? So I think we need to say that, can it be the other way around, right? Can the insurance industry be focused on how do you prevent, which is in sync with what they do, right? Like it's better if you don't get people who are sick or die. So that's the only industry that's currently synchronized with that. But in most other cases, that's not true. Right? And I think we need to think about how do you how do you save money. So if you look at it from a consumer point of view, people don't want to obviously spend that much money. So that is they are in sync, but they are not aware that they can make those changes because that information is given to them by the doctors, and they usually go there too late. The third piece is the government. Now, the government, for them, it will be very helpful if we can turn it on its head and say that, can we do that? And I think the government is now focused on prevention. They are creating a lot of preventive clinics and all that. I haven't seen the numbers recently, but I think that's where you need to start, right? That how many less number of like surgeries that you needed to do, how many less medicines that we needed to produce, and how much we have stayed healthier for longer. Then I think you'll see huge amounts of money coming in, right? But I think till that happens, I think we all have to find our own path and way to be able to keep it sustainable. The insurance industry, the individuals, and a lot more of the longevity clinics that are coming up, they have started to get some investment in and so on. So I think it's slowly happening, but it's not yet at a pace that you and I would like it to be.
I liked what you said. I think the solution could be if I get to pay lesser premium to my health insurance company, that could be a good way to start. Let's say if I have a higher risk than population, then probably they should charge more premium from me compared to other people who are healthier. That I think will change the mind of the people. I agree the industry is it's an industry level problem. But yeah, the point is there is funding in longevity side. Like longevity has become sort of a buzzword. Longevity, wellness, if you combine these and then you add a keyword, disease keyword related to gut health or cancer, then combining all of these buzzwords, there is funding available. But what is the base of that solution? Like genomics is a base of this solution because I really feel that genomics gives you the root cause analysis. So if there is no root cause analysis, you can't talk about longevity. So yeah, I really feel that a lot of funding should go into genetics. Like I was checking the US numbers, 23andMe probably is the most famous, and they reached at $6 billion valuation just with a simple test. You pay $100 and you get your ancestry report. Would you like to come up with a similar test, maybe in the health direction? But what is your star test that you would want to come and maybe that will help you reach out to the larger audiences?
So we do have all the tests that 23andMe does, and I think our star test is Genome Patri, which has a lot more health focus. But we do have traits and other things. I likely to be a morning person, night person. Are you likely to eat these particular vitamins and not? So we've created different products, right? So we've created one for kids, we've created one for fitness, and we've created Genome Patri, which includes the disease and all. So I think if you've gone to our website recently, what we said was we'll create a baseline, right? So for everybody wants to know basic wellness and other things. Some people might want to add to that disease risk. Some people might want to add to that pharmacogenomics, which is how do you respond to medicines and so on. And you might want to add to that longevity. We did a study recently in Nature that was published and so on. So we've started adding all those elements. But we said we'll build a baseline and then you can keep adding to that whatever else you want. So we've already done that. The difference really was that we were also doing the counseling. And I think that means that a lot more interaction with the consumer. And therefore we see that is the case. But we do the same thing. People order from our website, they get a kit in the mail and they take a little swab and they do it. So it's a very similar concept. We also have an ancestry product called Genome Patri Heritage, which I think we are the only company in India that does it. So there are these tests that we have. I think the difference really is that they raised a few $1 billion in funding and we didn't. So I think to market a product like that also needs a little bit of capital to be able to market it and get there. But we've certainly, I think we started around I started in the year 2000, and we've seen 23andMe from 2006 onwards. So we are familiar with what they have done. And I think recently, I think the founder has brought back the company out of bankruptcy and restarted that. So which is a good thing to see.
No, my point was that from US point of view, $100 is nothing. But from Indian point of view, $100 is a lot of money. If you are able to, let's say, reach out to larger audiences, do you feel that the prices will also come down? Like, for example, if a bare minimum blood test costs you maybe 500,000 rupees, maybe 15 up to 1500 rupees, but can gene testing be as cost effective as the blood test?
To bring it down quite substantially, it is below below $100. But I think what you have to understand is your blood test you have to keep doing every year, right? So that adds up. This you're doing once. You don't have to keep repeating it, every year or every other year. You're doing it once in a lifetime. So I think that's the difference. It will come down, but I think that we've already brought it down below anybody else in the world. So how much of that can be done is the question that because you are also including in that counseling session, which in the US itself will cost you $150.
Correct,
Right.
correct.
So I think those are the kind of things, because you have to have specialized genetic counselors who understand. How do you talk to a customer who's not yet sick, right? You're talking to somebody who's healthy, and how do you counsel them and so on. So I think what we have tried to do is we have been able to piece this together. If we have enough medical doctors and your own doctor who understands what this means, then I think we can take that piece of counseling out and then be able to scale that up and reduce the cost further, right? So I think we can bring it down to a little bit lesser, but I think in order to do that, we will have to have many more people do it and have more doctors understand the value of these tests and how do they then do the next level of counseling and help them understand. And today we are seeing that a lot of hospitals have started making this part of their preventive health packages, but we have to see a lot more hospitals get to that, right?
Correct,
So
correct.
I think, we probably, I would say that it will come down to maybe around 5,000, which is, for once in a lifetime, and you're doing 130, 40 tests in that, it comes to almost nothing. It's lower than the cost you pay for blood tests.
Correct. You talked about you started in 2000 and you opened Map My Genome in 2012, 2013. How have you survived? You have raised money, but still you've not raised as much as other companies. So how have you survived? Plus you came back, you studied from IIT Kharagpur and went to US for further studies, and you came back to India. So it means that you are a patriotic person. You launched a new company, new technology for which there is no acceptance and no awareness and no money. How did you survive?
A lot of it was primarily self funded, and also funding from what we've been able to do. And it has not been an easy journey. So I think when we started in 2000, we started Ossimum Bio. We ended up acquiring 3 companies. Right? So we acquired companies in the US, in Germany, and the Netherlands, but our base was always India. Right? So we became one of the largest CROs at that point of time. Right? And this is before there was this huge investment into genomics, even in the US at that point of time. So there were very few companies then. So I guess I like the joy of creating something new in an industry that's very new. But once we did that, I think the reason why I've been able to survive in this is that we had a strong conviction and passion to be able to do that, right? That we know that eventually this will get to a point where it will be successful. And so while we could not have the money to maybe create it for, like, all the billions of people that are there in the universe, I think what we were able to do was to help people that we could. So a lot of it came through word of mouth, right? And I think that's been helpful for us, that our marketing money was more our people who benefited from this rather than than doing a large scale marketing. The second thing is we focused on seeing how we can reduce the cost, right? So when we started, I think our cost was really high. And for many people who don't realize this, we pay 30% more on average because of all the customs and import and all of that on any reagent that you get, right? So your cost is higher, but you're selling at a lower price point, right? Which means your margins will be much more thinner than what it will be in the US. So I think those are challenges that you face. But I think what helps is that we also have a very strong bioinformatics team. So we've done a lot of projects that have been some of the informatics work that we were able to do and other things. We tied up with a lot of hospitals. In the beginning, they were like, yeah, they were giving us 1-2 samples, but we continued to keep that up, right? So right from day one, we were engaged with the medical fraternity, we were engaged with hospitals, we were engaged with labs, the large labs, the small labs, and everybody else. We were engaged with clinics. So the idea was that we understand it's new, it's coming up, but we also started building a lot of knowledge around that. So it has slowly been that it is not going to happen overnight. It's not like you are not selling something that everybody already needs, but can you build that up? And for that you need data, you need good quality data research, but you need also trust. So you have to get accreditations. We have CAP and NABL, and you need to engage the people who actually people go to, right? Your doctors, your clinicians, and all of that. And then, of course, how do you make it accessible? So can people order online? Can they get it to you? And so we built that, and we were able to do it at a slower pace than I would have personally liked it to be. But I think we are now at a point where our systems are well optimized, where the product is fantastic, where we have the right scientific talent and the knowledge. We have been able to build the right product, and we have enough customers today that we are one of the largest reservoirs of that data. But we have done it with funding it ourselves without getting, because every time people will come back and say, build it bigger, slightly more bigger, slightly more bigger. And I think you can't wait for that to build an industry. I think if you are a pioneer in the space, you have to prove that it works. So I think that's what we do.
So would you like to say that today's entrepreneur, they should also find what they truly are passionate about and then probably take a bigger view, maybe a decadal view of building something rather than a smaller one?
But I feel that if you are, I keep saying, if you have your own unique obsession, right? And if you find that unique obsession and you focus on it, don't think that, what you read in the newspaper for X and Y and Z doesn't apply to you. Same as like how health works, right? Similarly, I think even your journey of entrepreneurship is going to be different. And at some point of time, if that is something that is, will get to a point where, what was today like groundbreaking will eventually get to a point where it's commoditized, it's more acceptable, and you've built that unique edge over others, then I think you have that edge. That's what you have to look at, right? So don't just focus on saying, can I get the funding in, can I get this in, that in. I think focus on what you like doing, what you are passionate about, and I think the rest eventually fall in place. So I think, so your focus has to be, do I have the conviction enough to build a business in this space? Do I really believe that this will work? And does my team believe that it works? Right? That's another important thing. When you're building something, are you taking those people who also believe that? And then the third is to say that do it in a way that is slightly maybe different from maybe someone else who's done this in the rest of the world.
Okay. And your unit economics positive, even though there are thinner margins, but still your unit economic positive, and you're profitable, and that is how you're running your business, investing that profit into.
At some points we've been profitable, sometimes not. We've funded it, we've done this thing. We were also very during COVID, we also used our knowledge in doing these things. We started more with research studies actually. And then we got into testing for the airport and doing things like that. So I think it is that when you have that knowledge and ability, sometimes you have to look at opportunities in a slightly different way.
Okay. I was talking to a 36-year-old radiologist. He is based out of Karnataka. Initially, after the degree, he worked in tier 1 cities, and then he went back to his tier 2 city from where he was born. And he started opening radiology labs. He could see that there was no lab, so that became an opportunity for him. Now he also keeps on talking about onco screening. So currently, obviously 70-80% business comes from the doctors, but he sees a lot of opportunity, the next opportunity in onco screening, and he wants to build a pathology, obviously, and a radiology combined product, package product for that. Do you feel that genetics should also be a part of it? It should be a holistic package.
Certainly think, because actually the real value is when you have radiology and you have genetics, you combine those two, you create what we call as a digital twin. That becomes extremely valuable, right? So we've done that with some of our partners as well. So I think there is real value in that, and especially he's looking at a market that is not so, I would say, interesting for some of the other large players. I think there is a huge business to be able to be built in that area, because you can then truly create something that's different, and especially in tier 2, tier 3, sometimes access to a doctor is not so easy as it is maybe in Delhi or Hyderabad or others. Right? So adding that genetic component will truly enhance the way they can create value for them.
Okay. And let's say, would you be? I have seen all of these labs. Like in labs are spread out. Even though the biggest of the companies, they also don't have pan India presence. Like maybe 300, 400 labs. That's it. And the focus on data is also not that huge. Do you feel that one is the genetic testing should be included, and do you feel that you can handle the data side of such labs? Let's say there is genetic testing, you know the data, you extract the insights. Let's say if you get the pathology and the radiology information also, do you feel that you can combine the data and come up with the holistic insights?
I think that's what we are getting to. It's called the G biome, where we are saying, can we combine genetics, pathology, data from like your ring and others, and come up with that. So we've done that for quite a few areas right now, and we are hoping to be able to add other components to it. In fact, one of our seniors from Kharagpur does work a lot on radiology data as well, and has a fantastic product that is created. So I think that's what we are trying to do, to combine these pieces together. So I think we certainly can put these elements of data together. We have done it currently a lot more on the pathology and putting some of the radiology information, but I think there is a possibility of building something absolutely fantastic for the future.
Correct. That will be the extreme longevity. Actually, that exactly is okay. And you said that you have built the base for the country, maybe. And do you yourself want to go D2C? Do you want to come up with similar offerings,
Talking about the combination of all
holistic
these.
holistic offerings? Let's say one is you go to them and you come to a win-win situation wherein you provide the genetic test. The other thing is that you lead it and you use their infrastructure and come up with your own brand name.
I think all are possible. I think right now, I think we have not yet done so much for, let's say, a third party, so much. But I think it's a possibility, because we have the algorithms, we have the infrastructure. I think if we can get the data in, then you can create that possibility of putting these pieces together. Right? And I think it'll be very helpful, especially for labs that probably don't want to invest in doing all this themselves. Right? That will become very helpful, and it gives them an easier view of showing their customers what value that they can get from putting these pieces together. Right? And the thing is that you are not going to get all the data points for everybody, but I think it's enough to have a minimum set of data for an individual, and then be able to combine that with other things to make it a lot more precise as you go.
So I have the last question. What kind of support would you like to seek from the government side, hospitals, doctors, and investor community?
From the hospitals and all, I think it would be that, can we work on building something that is for the health of the consumer or the patient, and for that you need to start early. So if we can focus on understanding that and helping them. But I think in order to get there, we also need to build the right kind of knowledge for these current and future doctors, right? Which means that you need a change in the syllabus. You need to incorporate some of the latest things within that, within the medical community, to not just have included genetics in their curriculum, but also continuous basis, right? How do you get the CMEs to have this focus on prevention and be able to look at that? So that would be one. The second would be, from a government point of view, I think it is very obvious that this is going to help them, but can they take on these projects? Because I think today what is happening is we have done a few projects like the Genome India and others that are being done. But I think if you use it to actually create it for the primary health centers, it can help in reducing deaths by giving the wrong medication. So a lot of the pharmacogenomics, it can help in saying how do I create these cohorts where I can treat them better. So from a government perspective, I think it can be very helpful. But I think they need to give us a hearing in terms of how is this going to help, and that we can always, if we get the right funding, help them with those creating of this infrastructure and being able to do it. And if the government takes a large part of the funding for that, I think it becomes helpful for themselves. They'll save lots of money in the longer term, because you will not have all these problems of wrong diagnosis or wrong medicine given to a patient, because sometimes that can result in death, and those kind of things, right? So I think there is easy understanding from a government perspective, from the insurance company's perspective, but I think there needs a change in terms of how those packages can be created. So there needs a change in terms of the viewpoint of that. From the investor community, I think we need more understanding of what does this do for us, right? And the difference is, from the investors, I think I would like to tell them that when you look at cancer, you're looking at a subset of the population that potentially can be looked at when you look at it from a preventive point of view, right? So I think that's the difference, that your target audience is actually much bigger. But so an investment into this will really make a much bigger impact. But they need to look at it from that angle and that lens. And I think that's
TAM is way bigger than they are actually. Okay. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm really proud that both of us come from IIT Kharagpur, and you're doing such amazing work. Thank you very much.
You have done a fantastic job. I think I've been following you. You've actually truly created a great community around what you've done, and I think continue with your unique obsession that you have, and I think we will see this become a lot bigger and better.
Thank you.